Hi, my name is Phil and I like talking about politics, and this video is going to be a bit of a speculative one. At the time you'll be watching it, if you're watching it when it's just gone live, there won't have been a verdict from the Supreme Court yet, but there may be within a few hours. Maybe you're watching it later, maybe there is one. I'm not entirely sure when the verdict's coming out, and of course I'm not entirely sure what it is going to be. Depending on what it is, depends on whether this is relevant or not. But it's really to have a think about what is the sort of judgment that we, and when I say we, I mean as someone who is opposed to this form of prorogation, would actually want. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So, Aidan O'Neill QC yesterday made it quite clear what sort of verdict he wants. He wants the court to find that the government have acted unlawfully in the way they prorogued Parliament, and specifically for the period of time they did it. But he further wants them to issue a binding court order. He doesn't trust the Prime Minister simply to recall Parliament and not play silly buggers again. Now that sounds sensible if you are opposed to this prorogation. That's the full works, isn't it? Of course, that's what you'd want. But I'll tell you what I saw. I saw Jolyon Moem QC, who must have been a colleague of Aidan O'Neill because they both worked on the same team. Jolyon Moem led the team when it won in the Court of Session in Scotland. And he said, actually, he doesn't want them to issue a court order. He just wants them to state that the prorogation was unlawful and not issue an order. And the reason he gave for that is he said, because this government is going to come before the Supreme Court again. And he wants everyone to see, not least of which the court itself, what sort of government this is. Now, from here on in, I have to go into a little bit of speculation as to exactly what he means. But this is what I imagine he means. So if the court find the prorogation unlawful, but they don't issue a binding court order, and bear in mind, the Court of Session found it unlawful, but they didn't issue a court order demanding that Parliament be immediately recalled, and it was not recalled even pending the verdict of this case. So what if Boris Johnson didn't recall Parliament, even despite this verdict? Or what if he dragged his feet on it? Or what if he did and then immediately prorogued it again? What if he basically wasn't in any serious sense complying with the verdict? Well, our next flashpoint is the 19th of October, isn't it? On the 19th of October, if Parliament hasn't voted for a Brexit deal, and Boris Johnson, and it hasn't voted for no deal, which of course it's not going to do, and Boris Johnson hasn't secured an extension at the EU summit, he will be bound by law to sign a letter, and the exact form of that letter is clearly prescribed. He doesn't get to change the wording or add anything or take anything away, to the EU Council requesting an extension. Now, bear in mind, we can't, take too much for granted, but the EU Parliament yesterday did vote by a massive margin to grant such an extension. Obviously, the EU Council members will have their views, but I suspect that their views will be more in terms of how long the extension will be, and that Ben Act specifically tells the Prime Minister he has to accept whatever extension is offered, has to accept it, and Parliament has to vote for it. He has to offer it to Parliament for a vote within 2 days. So even if he's prorogued Parliament at that time, he's going to have to recall it to comply with that aspect of the law. Now, there is just a suggestion, mind you, just a hint of a suggestion, that Boris Johnson may not play ball with this, that he thinks he can test the law. He can simply say, well, I don't think that law is real, so I'll just not do it. And if a court tells me I've got to do it, all right, then I'll do it. Which really shouldn't be the way it is, and I hope it's not the way it is. But maybe this is what Mr. Moem's thinking is. So, Boris Johnson on the 19th of October does not sign that letter. He is now in breach of the law. The following week, an emergency hearing is set up in the Supreme Court where the government QC, Sir James Eadie, I imagine again, has to try and defend the government's position. Only this time, first of all, they're trying to defend the indefensible position of the Prime Minister having specifically failed to comply with legislation. There's no issue here about constitution and statute. This is statute, this is clear. But here's the other thing. the government will also be standing in front of a panel whose previous verdicts they have ignored. You would imagine, and I think this is probably where the thinking is going, you would imagine that in this scenario, those Lord Justices are going to be minded to be pretty heavy-handed. They're not simply going to deliver a verdict that, no, you've broken the law, sort it out. They might actually act within the full powers that they have to compel Johnson to behave himself and maybe even punish him. I don't think we can ask for him to actually be sent to jail. It would be a fine thought, but I suspect not. But it is possible, because there could be a charge of like a misuse of public office, really, here. But that would be a different case, wouldn't it? So I think maybe that's the thinking with Jolyon Maugham. On the one hand, yes, you want to constrain Boris Johnson to comply with the verdict in the strongest possible terms. But I think it's the argument of give them enough rope and they'll hang themselves. So knowing that basically, you know, even if he complies and recalls Parliament, he can have them for a few days and then prorogue them again. And it's like they'll come back for a week and then be gone again. And it'll be a real pain in the ass. And that's probably what he would do, isn't it? Bring them back next week when, you know, it gets in the way of the Labour Party conference. Prorogue them at the end of that week. So then he's got a clear run at the Tory Party conference where Parliament's suspended again. I suppose maybe if they can have a week, can maybe Parliament then decide to enact a law to restrict prorogation. Maybe there'd be enough time to do that then. But yeah, I think that's probably what his thinking is. Let the government have just enough leeway to piss off those judges so that when he or his advocates are hauled in front of them again, when he tries to break the Benn Act, they will be in no mood to be kind at all. And of course, if he doesn't breach the Benn Act, if he does comply with it, well, then there's no problem, because then we avert the no-deal Brexit, don't we? Which is ultimately what this is all about. But anyway, those are my thoughts on that. Let me know yours in the comments below. As I say, maybe with the power of time, when you're watching this, you know the verdict. No more than I do then. But I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for further content. Until next time, I'll see you later.